Welcome to What's Your Baseline Shorts.
In this series, we're distilling down our usual long-form content from the What's Your Baseline podcast into a more concentrated and visual form.
Right, but most importantly, this is a brief, focused discussion about a key topic in architecture, process, business, change, and so much more.
One topic, one session, one take. That's What's Your Baseline Shorts.
My name is Roland Volt, and today I'm joined by my co-host, J.M. Merlinson.
Hey JM, welcome to a new What's Your Baseline Shorts. And to be honest, it feels if it was just minutes ago when we recorded the last one. Isn't that weird?
Don't give away our secrets, Roland. We record these all on different days with the same beard cut and shirt.
Yeah, different day, same shirt. No.
Well, this one's a new one all about process mining. Now, I know we've talked about it on the podcast a little bit, but that's nebulous about the concepts of process mining. This one's going to be really easy, just how to get into it. Because, man, people are trying to take their first steps. And I know you were at a conference recently. You asked who's doing process mining, and very few people actually put their hands up. But it's everywhere. People are talking about it all over the place. So how do you get started? So first and foremost, Roland, let's just define the term. Let's take 2 seconds to just refresh people. What is process mining? What does it look like? And how is it different from traditional BI?
Well, so process mining is a process improvement methodology that is using data, evidence-based analysis.
Ooh, evidence-based decision making.
And long story short, so what you do is you take log files from your systems, or if you do fancy task mining, you record what your users do and then bring it in. But based on that data, you recreate processes, right? And so all the process mining softwares, they have some visualization in a graph, like a process explorer, where you then see all the nooks and crannies, what your process do and how people do rework and how long it takes and what the frequency is and how many processes get lost in that big spaghetti diagram and all those wonderful things. So it helps you to analyze the process based on the data, not on what your SMEs that you might have collected in a conference room tell you what the process is. And I think this is what makes it so interesting for all the people, because it's all the new stuff and it's evidence based.
Well, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people struggle with when they think about designing processes. They think about as is and to be. That's what, what's my as is, what's my to be, or my what if states, or my transition states. This is one level below the as is. This is actually the as executed. So you've designed a process the way you wanted it to happen. Your as executed is something like it, probably, but also quite unlike it. And in some ways, process mining actually gives you too much information because it shows you all of the different possible paths and all the variations when what you're trying to see is the forest. That's why finding a way to granularity slide it is a powerful tool.
I disagree with you. This is
really
the as is, and the as is messy. So your process model is the abstraction. But maybe to take a step back to come back to your question, what's the difference to traditional BI, right? Because you also look at KPIs and all these type of things, but the difference is you put it in the context of a process. You're looking for, how do I get from step A to B to C to D? And I think this is different than what you would do if you would fire up your Tableau or your whatever Qlik or whatever visualization software you use, even though you can build dashboards in process mining tools as well.
Yeah, one thing to make sure I just want to loop back a little bit on when you said it. This is your as is. So it is kind of. One of the things that we do with process mining that we miss is often the intermediate steps. A lot of the manual tasks, things that you just won't capture, even in task mining, things that are done away from a computer, things that are done in human interactions, facilitating sessions that are happening for conversations, decision-making that goes on. That doesn't happen in systems. It also doesn't happen on desktops. It happens in the real world and in person back in the days before COVID. So there is a level of abstraction that you talked about above as executed, but you're right. It is as messy and as ugly as it is your as is, kind of. And that maybe is uncomfortable to talk about, but it's a conversation you need to have.
But that's the whole purpose of process mining, to see what's actually going on. But having said that, just to put that out of the conversation, all those other process improvement methodologies that you've done before, like having workshops, like value stream mapping, like whatever, right? Lean, they're all valid. And it's not one size fits all, right? So pick the right methodology for the problem that you have.
Yeah, think about it like you're still process soldiers going to war, but you're just giving them better weapons. You're
Yeah,
giving them
well,
more information, better insight. These are tools to use for professionals to do even more with what they already know how to do. You know what I
so
mean?
JM, how is then a process mining project different from, say, a regular BPM project where you want to show whatever regulatory compliance or improve your process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the big difference that I see in a lot of those projects is where you call the source of truth, the canonical source of truth.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, traditional BPM projects are a lot of interviews, a lot of best practice knowledge coming from SIs and consultancies and things like that. Whereas process mining projects, data is king. It is. Whatever the data says is the way it was. Now, I always have the expression, context is its crown. So once again, you're using process mining professionals or process mining as a professional tool for BPM professionals. So data is the
Hmm.
root of the analysis and the root of the conversation. And the other thing that process mining projects look a little bit different from is that a lot of process mining vendors, like the vendor technology and their methodologies and practices and their approach and thought leadership actually goes into the way the analysis come out. So a lot of times there's pre-configured analyses that kind of give things people tend to want upfront. So your BPM project is kind of accelerated because you're not developing a lot of these analyses. You're using benchmark style analyses from the vendor itself to draw on, and then you add custom analyses on top of that. Have you seen that sort of
Yeah.
thing?
Oh, yeah. And that is, for example, if you want to do conformance check, if you want to upload a process model, which is the how should people do the process,
Yeah.
and then the process mining tool compares the data set underneath with that
Mhm.
process and tells you exactly, oh, this is where you go astray. Like in a procure to pay scenario, the process should not start with you receiving an invoice, right? It should
Right.
start with a purchase rec or a purchase order, right?
Yeah.
And all these things.
So
Um,
put yourself in
mhm.
my shoes, Roland. I'm going to pretend I've never done process mining before. I'm a brand new. Let's say I'm a new grad, or I'm somebody who's young in a company trying to like explore new technologies. What skills do I need to start the conversation around process mining for me, for my colleagues, for my organization, and for my whole company as a larger conversation?
So maybe the very first thing
What's
is
the first thing?
you should be a nice person, because at the end of the day, you deal with people,
Yes,
right?
that's
Even if
true.
JM says data is king, at the end of the day, you're talking with clients, right? So
Yeah.
listen to them and try to understand what they want to accomplish.
Yeah, that
That
was
is a
James Denning's thing. He said you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror in the morning.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
we
oh
want to
yeah.
hire good people. I love that message.
That and whatever, all those process mining podcasts I listen to, even though when they claim to be very technical, they just circle around the topic of, oh, it's the people,
Yep.
good or bad. But anyway, so that would be the first thing. The second skill that I would highly recommend to develop is you need to understand how data looks like. And you
Yeah.
must be comfortable to work with data. If somebody throws you some SAP tables over the fence, which they shouldn't do. But if that happens, you should understand, well, what do I see here, right?
Hmm.
And how are those tables related to each other? When you think
Yeah.
about, and that's the third one, you need to understand, obviously, the process underneath, right? So if you think about a P2P process, procure to pay process, well, you must know in advance the purchase rec comes before the purchase order, that might come before the invoice, that might come before the goods receipt, and so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
you need to
That'll help.
understand, yeah, you need to understand how that data it's retrieved from the systems, right? In this example, an SAP system or an Oracle, which tables
Hmm.
is it stored? And then you need to be able to take those tables and transform them into a format that your process mining tool understands.
Yeah, you might want
And
to
is
become familiar with something like Data Dictionary. Like you
uh-huh.
might want to become familiar with creating your own data dictionary, having those facilitated interviews with your data owners to say, what does this field mean? So becoming familiar with that practice and then developing templates that you can send out to people so that the next time you get data, unfortunately, thrown over the wall, at least it comes with some context you can actually use to analyze it.
Mhm. That's true. And then that's the first step, right? That's all, whatever, project hygiene, if you will,
Hmm.
right? The more interesting stuff is, well, you need to know what to look for. So what
Yeah.
are the KPIs? Stick with that example, right? When you have an order process, well, what are you looking for? Is it just generic? How long does it take? Or how many of those orders do we have? That's one thing, right? I think you need to drill down a little bit more into industry specific KPIs. So, for example, OTIF, orders on time and in full is one of the supply chain KPIs that the Supply Chain Council, or whatever their current name is, will be happy to tell you that's something you should look at. So I think you need to do your homework when you've identified the process that you're looking at, or which is in scope. You need to figure out what are typical KPIs to look at. And just going in there without having done that homework, well, you might get a suboptimal result from it.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think you need. I don't want to take the stress that there's so much training and experience necessary on this one, but a fundamental understanding of statistics might be really helpful for you. So I come from an engineering background. I've taken a couple of statistics courses. I know enough about them to have some really basic terminology down, but you don't need to be a deep statistic expert. Just know the kinds of statistical analyses that can be done at a very high level. You don't need a data science background necessarily. In fact, if you're working with a good vendor, you won't have to have anyone with that deep of a background to get some good process mining insights out. But yeah, just a basic knowledge of statistics and statistical methods.
I agree. You should know what, for example, the difference is between the average and the median.
Yeah.
And how that relates to if you have the full data set or just a sample of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because that might be 2 different interpretations or 4 different interpretations that you might get when you apply this.
And alongside that is you want to be able to present information, right? So one of the things that I really want to talk, I talk to these people, people all the time about this. You want to be able to tell a story. Essentially, you're writing a narrative. What does our process tell us? What happened when, and where do we emerge out some opportunities for improvement? What kinds of opportunities are there? So know how to tell that story, right?
Yeah, but before you tell the story, I think what you need to know is, what do I want to know? Right? What's my hypothesis before I go in there? Is it we think this process stinks because vendor XYZ doesn't do its job, or when you think about IT service management, does it always stuck with that outsourced incident group that's working on it, and how do they work? So you should have a gut feeling, and then you look into your data and you create those visualizations, and maybe you see a story evolving in your data, and that's, I think, a complete different skill set in itself that I know that we're going to talk about when you talk about building custom dashboards and all that
interface
stuff,
design, user experience for design for
all these things.
Visuals. Yes. Yeah, we'll go into that later. But Roland, I want to summarize this all into something. Really, we're telling you that you can do this. The barrier to entry is incredibly low, and that there are ways that that you can work with vendors, you can work with consultancies that can help you get started with almost no information, just a good canonical data set you understand, good hypotheses you want to interrogate, and a good way of telling and selling that story to a larger community. So, but Roland, where do I go next? What's the information that I can take away from this podcast, and that's generally available oftentimes for free, that we could consume to really dig into this?
Yeah. So if you're a complete newbie and you haven't heard about process mining, there are really good books that are good introductions. And I'm not talking about the academic literature that explains how the algorithms work and all that stuff, but it's written for the regular business person. And I will put some links into the show notes, right? Once you've done that and you got a good understanding of what process mining is and how it works, and maybe you've watched a couple of videos on YouTube about this, and see what the different vendors have to offer, well, then you might want to take a step back and have a look at your organization, right? Find a problem that they have. And when you do this, keep in mind, process mining is not for any problem, right? It's for processes. It will not help you if you have a branding problem or a market perception problem or whatever, production problem because your machines always die,
No, it's more other fixes for those.
Yeah, how do we orchestrate processes, right? And how can we get better? So that's the other thing that you want. And then once you have that, JM, what would be the next step?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you can start looking at actual technology. You can actually go and start piloting out. We had a short about POCs and POVs. Start using tools. There's a lot of free downloads, free versions you can download. Start bringing data in, even just dummy data. A lot of those free versions actually have dummy data you can download, as well as get free trainings on them. So go educate yourself on the practice of using the platform to do things, and start communicating that out with your peers and with your management. Because if you can start to show these gains, these pretty substantial gains in a very small amount of effort, you have a really good case to take this to the next level.
And then there's always, which I would highly recommend, is to have a look at online communities. For example, that little community around what's your baseline on LinkedIn, right?
Oh my goodness. Tell us about that, Roland.
Oh, well, I don't want to do the pitch here, but no, in all seriousness, look at this. There's people out there who have the same interests like you. Start the conversation with them.
Yeah.
Go to virtual user groups. Go to dedicated process mining events. Once the whole COVID stuff is a little bit more better, right? Anyways, so do this, mingle and become part of the community, and you will see the vendors also support this, right? It's not that they just go and say, hey, yeah, buy our software and then bye-bye. They definitely have an interest to have the conversation with you.
Yeah.
Anything else, JM?
Roland, I think it's an excellent place to get started. Thank you so much. And you did mention the show notes. What'syourbaseline.com will have all the show notes with some examples of things you should read. Roland, you got lots of great advice. But this has been a fantastic discussion, my friend. Thank you so much for a little bit of the first toe into process mining.
Well, then, as always, JM, glad talking to you. My name is Roland Volt.
And it's glad talking to you. My name is J.M. Merlinson, and we're going to see you in the next one.